Here's the thing about Georgia and all of the other programs that are expected to be national title contenders on a year in and year out basis is the standard's very high, which means the margin for error and the margin for scrutiny is pretty slim, right? Because you're expected to be your elite. You're expected to be really good at everything, especially when you string together a ton of years of greatness, which is what Georgia's done recently. And then 2024 was a dip in that. It was a regression, especially on the offensive side of the football. Now, the defense also regressed, but not as harshly as Georgia's offense did. And the offense is largely the reason why the Dogs struggled last season. And when we say struggle, they were 10-2 and then won the SEC championship, right? That kind of goes to show the standard that Georgia is held to, that we hold it to, and that, look, Kirby created and holds this program to himself. I think that all of the skill position groups on offense need to improve. I want to specifically discuss, and when I mean skill positions, I'm discussing the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends in this video. We'll talk about the offensive line and the quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, much more over this offseason, as we already have. But which of these three groups, backs, wideouts, and tight ends, which needs to improve the most? I think that that's a hard question to answer. I want to sift through all three, talk about the changes made to the personnel and the expected improvements. But I think one of them is difficult to project. I think the other two, improvement seems imminent, right? And if it isn't, then Georgia's going to run into a problem because, look, last year wasn't good enough. And that's just kind of the bottom line for the Dogs. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about Georgia's offense, the skill position rooms, talking about which ones need to improve the most. If we examine the running backs, we examine the wide receivers, we examine the tight ends, all three of them did not perform up to the level that they needed to. Let's hit on it real quick. The running backs, it was the worst rushing year for Georgia in nearly 20 seasons. The Dogs have had a really good line of running backs in their history. And it kind of felt like the line, at least in recent history, ended in 2024, right? That line just kind of ended. 17 plus 100 yards on the ground total is not the standard. Georgia consistently gets over 2,000 yards. They've gotten over 3,000 yards before. From a production standpoint, the running game wasn't there. Big playability, right? There just weren't that many big-time runs. I can think of like 4 over the course of an entire season off the top of my head. Should be able to think about more than that. They just didn't hit on a ton of big-time runs over the course of the year. It just didn't happen. And then you think about the fact that they were just injured, right? So those were the issues with Georgia's running back room. Georgia's wide receiver room, the issues. Lack of firepower, lack of top-end talent, I suppose is a good way to put it, and then lack of health, right? They brought in Trevor Etienne to be the lead running back. He was a big transfer portal win for Kirby and the Dogs last offseason. What happens? Well, he misses the first game due to a suspension, so that's one game out the door. And then he deals with injuries throughout the year, specifically a rib injury. So he's kind of in and out of the lineup, right? And that's the guy that was supposed to be your RB1. He was Georgia's RB1 for the most part throughout the season, but he wasn't always available and he wasn't always healthy. Roderick Robinson, injured, right? He was expected to be the RB2 behind Trevor Etienne. When we were talking during the spring and during the offseason, we talked about Trevor Etienne 1, Roderick Robinson 2. He played hardly at all, right? Had 4 carries due to that injury. So the guy that was expected to be RB2, he's not playing. Branson Robinson, the guy expected to be RB3, he comes in, he actually starts in that first game, coming back from a big-time injury in that ruptured patella tendon, and it doesn't look the same for Roderick Robinson, or for Branson Robinson. He wasn't quite ready, and then he ends up getting hurt. So the guy that's supposed to be RB3, he's in and out of the lineup and has barely any production throughout the season. You got Cash Jones, a guy who made a big play, made a handful of big plays throughout the season, but a guy that they only really use as the receiving back. And then you had Nate Frazier, a true freshman who had to step in and ended up being Georgia's lead ball carrier throughout the 2024 season. So immediately, you just don't have all the guys you need to. So you just didn't really have your guys. With the wide receivers, you lacked talent and firepower, right? I used that word firepower earlier in this video. With the wide receiver room, you didn't have a go-to guy you could rely on. They had really talented players like Lavikonke and A.D. Mitchell in that room, and some other guys that maybe weren't quite as talented but were super reliable. They lacked that reliability in 2024, and that was completely emphasized by the fact that they led the country in drop passes. And that was a narrative that really started brewing a lot towards the second half of the season, was a stat that was brought up a lot. And when you drop passes, it made Carson Beck's job more difficult, and in turn, he played even worse, right? Some of Carson Beck's issues were on Carson, but some of it was on these wide receivers just not getting the job done. So you got two rooms there, and the fact they actually had a similar issue in terms of not having the personnel as well. Ra Thomas kicked off the team, projected starter before the season even started. Another projected starter, and Kobe Young, who played in the first few games, didn't make it halfway through the season before he was suspended from the team. They didn't have their personnel there either. So a lack of production and a lack of personnel was kind of a similar thing between the wide receivers and the running backs. And then the tight ends. Honestly, it's not a room that people expected to struggle in 2024, is the best way to put it. It was expected to be pretty good. Now, when Brock Bowers goes out the door, you know that things aren't going to be quite as good, right? Because he's one of the best tight ends in college football history, arguably the best. He entered the NFL and was immediately another argument, immediately arguably the best tight end in the NFL. And so you look at that and you say, okay, well, we know it's not going to be as good, but Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Benjamin Urasek, the transfer they brought in, going to be really talented. When you add their production together, you get around 700-800 yards, 5 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. All three of them combined hardly matched what Brock Bowers' worst season was, which was the 2023 season where he didn't play the entire season. So from a production standpoint, it just wasn't what you thought it was going to be. Oscar Delp was really absent for a couple of months. Didn't, had one really big play against Texas in October. But other than that, it took him until November to really get the ball rolling. Most of his production came in that final month of the season, and then made a couple big plays in the SEC Championship game. Lawson Lucky started out kind of hot, and then his production dipped. Benjamin Urasek didn't score, only 185 yards, and then they don't really go past that 3 deep. So all three of them had issues. How are they going to improve? Well, running backs. Health is the biggest thing, all right? Is Roderick Robinson going to be healthy? They bring in Josh McCray to be another power back, another year of Nate Frazier, another year of Cash Jones, Chauncey Bowens, Dwight Phillips Jr., Bo Walker. Seems like they've got better personnel there, and if that's the biggest thing with running backs is health. If they are healthy, then this room should be better than it was a year ago. With wide receivers, well, they brought in more talent. They brought in Zachariah Branch. They brought in Noah Thomas. That should be an immediate bump, along with other guys just being a year older, like Dylan Bell, who's the most experienced in this room and is a senior. Scovie White entering year 2. London Humphreys entering year 2 of the program. You get Kobe Young back. All of a sudden, when you rope in the fact that they brought in 3 talented freshmen as well and have a walk-on in Jeremy Bell, who's expected to be an X-factor, all of a sudden Georgia's wide receiver room looks like it has a little bit more firepower. And then the tight ends. That's the one that's difficult to project. Are they going to play better? Because this room's largely the same. In terms of main guys, you'll swap out Benjamin Urasek for second-year Jaden Riddell, who I think has a lot of talent and could be a really good piece for Georgia. But Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky are going to be your main duo at the tight end position again. So that's the one that's hard to project. If you look on paper and you just kind of watch tape and everything, it looks like Georgia's running backs and wide receivers, you can almost certainly say, hey, I think that those two groups are going to be better. I think that Nate Frazier in year 2 can be a really good running back in college football. And I think the supporting pieces in that running back room which will probably be a committee-style back room, I think complement each other. And then when you look at the wide receivers, it's got a little bit more talent. It's got a little bit more experience this time and pieces that complement each other really well. It's the tight ends. They just have to play better. We know that they're really good. We know Oscar Delpin, Lawson Lucky, Jaden Riddell were big-time prospects. They just have to play better. You could point to a couple of these rooms and say, yes, I think they improved, but all of them really need to if they're going to compete for a national title. Appreciate you watching.